The fruit of coconut is an example of a, options are drupe, berry, nut and capsule. Let us examine all the options starting with the first one. The first option is drupe. Now drupe is a type of simple fruit that can be found in plants like mango and coconut. We have already arrived at the answer, but let's look at what kind of flower produces the fruit drupe. The flower that produces a drupe type of fruit is monocarpellary and has a superior ovary. Now, monocarpellary means that the gynoecium is made up of a single carpel. Superior ovary refers to the condition where the ovary occupies the topmost position in the flower and the other three floral whorls arise from below it. Okay, so the characteristic feature of this kind of a fruit is that its endocarp is very hard and stony. Let's take a look at the picture of a coconut given here. You can see that the pericarp is clearly divisible into three distinct layers: the outer epicarp, the middle mesocarp, and the inner endocarp. The outer epicarp, as you can see in the tender coconut, the outer green color, it is leathery in structure, right? So inside this epicarp, you can find a fibrous mesocarp. Now inside the mesocarp, you can find a very hard and stony endocarp. So the second option in this question was berry. Berry is also an edible fruit that is small and pulpy. Example for berry includes grapes, brinjal and tomato. Here, the fruit is produced from a flower that is multicarpellary and syncarpous, which means that the gynoecium has multiple carpels and the multiple carpels are fused. Okay, so if you look at this diagram, you can make out that the outer thin layer, which is labeled epicarp, that is the peel of the tomato. Okay, inside this epicarp, you don't have a clear distinction between the mesocarp and the endocarp. The mesocarp and the endocarp would have fused to form the pulp of the tomato, within which the seeds will be embedded. Okay, so you can see that here, this is the mesocarp and this is the endocarp, and they have both fused and the seeds are embedded within that. Okay, so the third option was nuts. Nuts are a type of simple and dry fruits that have a single chamber. It is indehiscent, meaning it will not split open once the fruit ripens, and it has a single seed. Now this develops from a bicarpellary or multicarpellary syncarpous gynoecium. What do we mean by bicarpellary? Bicarpellary means that the gynoecium has two carpels. Multicarpellary means the gynoecium has several carpels. So either it is bicarpellary or multicarpellary, it is going to be syncarpous, which means that the carpels will be fused amongst themselves. Okay, so here the pericarp, which is the fruit wall, is very hard and woody. Okay, so that is the reason it is classified under dry fruit. Example for this is cashew nut, lychee and oak nut. Here's an image of a nut given in the slide. This is a picture of the hazelnut. And the last option is capsule. Capsule is also a simple and dry fruit. Rarely it can be fleshy, but here it is dehiscent, which means once the fruit ripens, it will split open to release the seeds. Okay, examples for this is cotton and poppy. Here you can see an illustration of a fruit of a poppy plant, which is a capsule. Okay, so with that, we can answer this question very easily. The fruit of coconut is an example of a drupe in which the characteristic feature is that the endocarp is hard and stony. Here's the question. The single cotyledon of maize grain is called, the options are scutellum, plumule, coleorhiza and coleoptile. Now all the four options are parts of the maize grain. We are required to find out which one is the name for the cotyledon in a maize grain. Let us look at the diagram of the maize grain to arrive at the answer. So here's a picture of maize grain given. We know that the maize is the fruit in a maize is a caryopsis, where the pericarp, the fruit wall and the seed coat will have fused. Here you will find the endosperm and the embryo. Okay, so the endosperm occupies a large portion of the seed here, and you can find the embryo as well. Within the embryo, you can find the embryonal axis as well as the cotyledon attached to it. As you can see here, since maize is a monocot plant, you can find that there's a single cotyledon that is large and shield shaped. Okay, so this is known as the scutellum. Now in the embryo part of the seed, you can find two regions, the plumule and the radicle. The plumule gives rise to the shoot system of the plant after the seed germinates, while the radicle gives rise to the root system of the plant. There are sheath-like coverings that protect the radicle and plumule. The sheath that protects the radicle is known as the coleorhiza, while the sheath that protects the plumule is known as the coleoptile. Here you can see all of those marked. Okay, so this is the embryonal axis. This is the radicle. It is covered by the coleorhiza, while this is the plumule which develops into the shoot system, and it is covered by the coleoptile. Okay, so this is the characteristic feature that we can observe in monocots. So the correct answer to this question is option A, scutellum. That is what the single large shield-shaped cotyledon in the maize grain is known as. I now have a question about seeds. Non-albuminous seeds are produced in, options are maize, castor, wheat and pea. Now, in order to answer this question, we must first know what non-albuminous seeds refers to. Now, based on the presence or absence of endosperm in the seeds at maturity, we can classify seeds into two different types. That is, endospermic or albuminous and non-endospermic or exalbuminous. So, what is this endosperm? Endosperm is a tissue that is formed after double fertilization. It is present inside the seed and it nourishes the developing embryo, which is also inside the seed. Now, this endosperm can be present in the form of starch, protein, oils and other nutrients. Usually, dicots do not contain endosperm at maturity. What happens here is the young seeds will have endosperm, but the endosperm gets remobilized into the cotyledons during their development, and the cotyledons will start supporting the growth of the embryo. As a result, at maturity, dicots will show the absence of endosperm. Whereas in monocots, you can find endosperm occupying most part of the seed even at maturity. Okay, so there are exceptions for both monocots and dicots. Usually dicots are non-endospermic, but castor, despite being a dicot, will show the presence of endosperm in the mature seed. Likewise, even in monocots, though most of them are endospermic, some monocots like orchids, they do not have endosperm at maturity. Okay, here we can see a pea plant, the seeds of the pea plant. This is a dicot plant and it is non-endospermic or exalbuminous. Here there is an image of a maize cob where you can see that the maize grains are shown. These maize grains are caryopsis. They contain the endosperm even at maturity. Okay, so let us look at the options now. Since non-albuminous seeds are asked, you must look for options that have names of dicot plants. Here we have two dicot plants, pea and castor. I just mentioned that castor is an exception in dicots for being endospermic, so this is the wrong answer. Maize and wheat, they are both monocots and they are both endospermic, so they are also wrong. So the correct answer is option D, P. Here's the question. Seed coat is not thin and membranous in, the options are coconut, groundnut, gram and maize. Of the four options, the seed coat in coconut is comparatively thicker. Here you can see the seed of the coconut. While propagating coconuts, unlike other plants, the entire fruit is sown inside the soil. Here you can see that the seed has germinated while still being inside the fruit. So the seed coat here is thick and hard. So the correct answer to this question is option A, coconut. The other three plants, groundnut, gram and maize, in these plants the seeds will have a thin and membranous seed coat. Groundnut, gram and maize, all of these three plants are, they produce dry fruits. While groundnut produces a fruit known as legume that is dehiscent, gram and maize are dry fruits that are indehiscent. Dehiscent means that the fruit, once it ripens, will split open to release the seeds, whereas in gram and maize, you don't find that happening. Okay, so groundnut is known as the legume. It has a papery seed coat. Gram and maize, being dry, indehiscent fruits, they produce seeds which also have thin and membranous seed coats. In maize, you can find that the seed coat would have fused with the fruit wall, which is also known as the pericarp. So the correct answer to this question is option A, coconut. Here the seed coat is not thin and membranous, it is comparatively thicker and hard. Now here's a question about fruits. What do you call a fruit that develops from an inflorescence? The options are simple fruit, false fruit, aggregate fruit, and composite fruit. Let us examine all the options starting with the first one. The first option was simple fruit. It develops from a single flower which has a monocarpellary or multicarpellary syncarpous gynoecium. So here, in order for a fruit to be called a simple fruit, it should have developed from a monocarpellary or a multicarpellary ovary, that is syncarpous. So the number of carpels in the ovary can be one to many, but if they are many, they have to be fused. Okay, so example for this is pea. In pea, you can find a unilocular ovary. Here's a picture of the pea flower. This is the ovary, and the ovary develops into the fruit. You can see that the single unilocular ovary has many seeds that are attached at the margin. Second, we had false fruit. False fruit is any fruit that develops from any part of the flower other than the ovary. One example for this is apple. In apple, the part that is edible, the part that we consume, is not the ovary, but it is the thalamus. The thalamus or the receptacle is the part that is broad, and it is that part on which the other floral whorls are arranged, correct? So here, this thalamus part of the flower will become fleshy. So since this fruit is not developing from the ovary but the thalamus, it is known as the false fruit. Here's a picture of the apple flower and the apple fruit. So here you can see that the thalamus covers the ovary, and in the fruit it has become fleshy. The actual ovary in the apple fruit is the part that we throw away after eating the apple. So it's the core of the apple within which the seeds are embedded. Okay. So the third option was aggregate fruit. In order for a fruit to be considered an aggregate fruit, it should have developed from a multicarpellary apocarpous gynoecium, which means that multicarpellary it refers to the condition where there are more than one carpel in the gynoecium. Apocarpous means they are free and they are not united. So what happens in such a case is each carpel will give rise to a segment of the fruit. Each one of this segment is known as a fruitlet. This can be observed in raspberry. Here's an illustration of the raspberry flower and the raspberry fruit. Okay, so the last option was composite fruit. Composite fruit is a fruit that develops from an inflorescence. So here what happens is that the entire inflorescence will give rise to one fruit. What is an inflorescence? Inflorescence is a group of flowers that is arranged in a particular manner. Okay, so here each flower in the inflorescence will give rise to one segment of the fruit. This can be observed in pineapple and jackfruit. Okay, so the question was, which fruit develops from an inflorescence? Now we know that if a fruit develops from an entire inflorescence, it is known as a composite fruit.